Welcome to the cliff city of Akamora, Ada. I might have something for you. You want it? I've got 2 jobs that need to be done. The first one is a package that needs to be transported, and the second one are some Nix-hounds that don't seem to like the Silt Strider passing through their territory. Obviously I'm going for the Nix-hounds, so that leaves you with the package transport. The High Elf Galdelier at Tamriel Manor needs a package delivered. I don't know much more than you do, so I guess he'll explain everything when you've arrived at the manor. Tamriel Manor is the house of Councillor Sorval Tamriel and is located south of Akamora. The only way to the manor is a path that starts a bit southwest from the Tyranat Pari's egg mine on the back road of Akamora. You can reach the back road at the west entrance of town near the Silt Strider, or you could pass through the egg mines at the east entrance of town. You can see the tower from a long distance, so you'll know when you are on the right track.
This is an honor for... Three blessings, sir.
Do you have something to say,
It's
Outlander?
all good to see you.
Too much trouble. Must be going now.
Gajavr welcomes the Dark Elf to Tamriel Manor. Gajavr does not think you look untrustworthy, so Gajavr will allow you to enter. Be warned, that if the Dark Elf bothers Gajavr's master, Gajavr will no longer be so kind to the Dark Elf. It is the home of Gajavr's master, and thus it is Gajavr's home as well. Gajavr's master, Sorval Tamriel, is definitely someone in particular. There is no one here who can claim to be greater. Even Gajavr's loving mate Savangia is not comparable to Master Tamriel. With that said, it would be for the best if you did not tell Savangia that Gajavr said such a thing. Record of the Visitors. By Grim Coles Greg. This is a record of all the people who have visited Tamriel Tower. Their names, occupation, their possible guild memberships and sometimes even their motives of the visit are written in this book. Southwest region of the Telvanni lands. Taken from your Verfever's Atlas of Morrowind. Southeast region of the Telvanni lands. Taken from your Verfever's Atlas of Morrowind.
Under sun and sky, Outlander, we greet you warmly.
The Gospel of Saint Nerivar. The fields were ravaged. The fires of Red Mountain had swallowed the once simple and pristine lands of Velith. Those saints of ancient days mourned Velithai in the darkness of the mountains. Felms mourned the death of his brothers as he assaulted Windhelm. Olms mourned his kinsmen and the lawmen of Redoran that had fallen. Priests and prophets beheld the miracle of Necrom, for Velith rose from his tomb and, falling upon his knees, wept so bitterly that even the wild beasts of the countryside came forth to mourn the death of his beloved Velithai. The armies of Indoril and Redoran marched from La Athi Erli in the south and Ba'an Malur in the west. The traitorous Sixth House had turned from the ways of Velith and had taken up the blasphemous thoughts of the Deep Elves. The sky seemed to despair before all of Tamriel. The winds held their breath, for a season of change was upon them. In those days, a farmer named Othrlas supported his wife and 2 daughters by scraping muck pods in hopes of finding but traces of muck to sell at Marindus. As the poor hungered and starved, Lord Hillerview of Marindus lived in such luxury that even the wicked Sanguine would have thought him impious. So it happened that the master of Marindus called out from his domed tower, saying, Othrlas, these lands are mine and everything within them at my will. Take down your shack and move along. I have no need of you.
3 blessings.
Marindus will expand to the south. Many of my kinsmen come to Marindus to outstay the war. The land you farm will be stripped and upon it, my citadel will extend. Go now, before I drive you out myself. The farmer Othrlas did nothing for 3 days. Each day he prayed to Mephala that the Horde-ator and his legions would come to Marindus and summon the nobles to war. Yet each day the armies did not come. On the 4th day, Lord Hillerview of Marindus cried out, Have you not taken to foot, Othrlas? My builders arrive from Marikan at tomorrow's dusk. Get you and yours hence. Again Othrlas did not move. He cried out to Mephala for guidance, but the shrine remained silent. The Lord of Marindus, however, could not murder Othrlas and his family, for he had never known battle himself, always watching it as a spectacle for those of lesser stock. Upon the morrow's dusk, Hillerview summoned Black Hands Mephala upon her dais. Lady Mephala, my hands seek blood but cannot draw it. I will build a temple to your majesty upon the bones of mine enemies. Only slay the farmer Othrlas and his family. Drive them from these lands. Send forth your blessed servants to do my bidding and I will reward you with offerings and sacrifice. So it came to pass that Nerivar and Olms marched towards the Foyada Mamia, seeking passage to Red Mountain. The Dwemer city of Arntand had been emptied, for all deep elves gathered at the fuming citadels. Nerivar looked out from beyond the golden mask that covered his blessed face. Vardenfell had been changed much. All the lands were dying. The waters and streams seemed to stagnate and rot. The Lady Almalexia came beside her lord and spoke. You are thirsty, husband. Should you not drink? Lord Vivek has told me of a place to the east. We could replenish our forces at Marindus. To this,
3
Lord
blessings,
Narivar
sir.
nodded. The glittering armies of Indoril and Redoran turned from the blood-red Foyada and journeyed into the Ascadian Valley. At the fields of Kumu they rested. Lord Vivek came before the Horde Ater and spoke. Son of Indoril, to the east is a small muck farm. It isn't much, but it is enough to feed out troops. What say you? The Horde Ater stood up and dusted the dirt from his greaves and cuirass. The farmhouse of Othralas was quieter than it usually was. Instead of the laughing of children, only weeping was heard. Lord Narivar opened the door to the shack only to find Othralas hanging from the rafters of his shack. His wife and eldest son had their throats cut, bleeding as Velathai now bled. Lord Narivar fell upon his knees and wept for the loss. Music and revelry could be heard from nearby Marindus. Vivek looked up towards the doomed citadel, then turned to Narivar.
3
The halls of
blessings,
Marindus
sir.
were greatly decorated with idols of that fortress lord. Narivar drew his sword as he opened the doors to the great feast hall. Beside Lord Hilarview sat Black Hands Mephila, drinking a goblet of blood taken from the children that had been sacrificed in her name. The Horde Ater tore off his helm and wept. How you have fallen, Black Hands Mephila. From Somerset you led my people to their destiny. Now you sit, a blind woman guiding the people toward perdition. Below this citadel lies dead a family whose piety was unfound throughout these lands, and yet you drew from them their last breath. Lord Hilarview rose up and came towards Narivar with glove in hand. Yet the Horde Ater did not intend to banter words with a murderer. With a single thrust, the debauched Lord of Marindus was felled. Mephila turned her body to face the Horde Ater completely. You have much bravery, Indoril. Men have died before speaking a single insult to me, yet I have shown mercy. You should thank me for this kindness. Instead, you call me blind before my followers. Such impiety. Such ingratitude. Did I not leave the youngest of Othrala's sons? Did I not leave him some prize? The youth will no longer be under the command of his father. He may do as he wishes. Unlike you, Narivar. Your father was a fool to teach you the sacred arts of war, for you have shamed him. How deceived you have become, Mephila. Boethia too has blinded himself. Velathai has kept its covenant with you, yet you have left your part unfulfilled. Your teachings once brought glory to Velathai, but now it misguides a lost race. As Velath prophesied the coming of Velathai, so I foresee. In 3 days' time, you will be no more, Black Hands. With that, Vivek entered the feast hall. Mephila started intently into his eyes but quickly turned away. She spoke with a solemn voice, nodding her head. I am reborn, Narivar Indoril. Let the anticipation cease. The throne upon which the Didra sat vanished as though it had never been. Narivar turned to Vivek and spoke. At Red Mountain the old ways will die. Eternal Spirit, guide Velathai. The Didra have failed us. Only Mother Soul remains pure and she has grown distant, sealing moon shadow from Mare. I fear for the lands of Velath. Vivek stood beside Narivar and kissed his lips. My beloved brother, we march towards eternity this night. At Red Mountain true flame will guide us as Velath's torch guided us through the jungles of Cyrodiil. Within 3 nights, the traitorous Shermit had been slain along with the Dwemer. As Narivar lay dying before the towers of Red Mountain, he cried out to his soldiers. Behold, sons of Velath. Dawn approaches and with it Shivi. The shards of true flame were gathered and returned to morning hold for all to see. Saint Narivar was carried from Red Mountain upon his shield to the city of Necrom where he was restored in the form of a bone walker by the divinity of Shivi. Narivar's conversion before the tribunal led to the conversion of much of House Indoril and Redoran. Many of those who had witnessed Saint Narivar's death at Red Mountain would become priests and monks, including General Olms of Redoran. Did you come here on purpose, Outlander, or did you get lost in the mountains and just happen to stumble upon us? You can usually find him at the manor house at the top of Tamriel Manor. This is the home of Sorval Tamriel, and those who serve him. Winter Solace. Horatio Gargonath. The snow gently fell on the mountain pass. All things were covered and shimmered like glass. In the distance, stood but a single young doe. As the forest revealed its icy show, fir trees were bent, in reverence, they bowed. Rabbits remained hidden beneath the tree's shroud. Icicles hanging, a lustrous cascade. A light wind blowing a melodious serenade. The mountain streams were now covered in ice. It was winter's welcome to paradise. The Epic of the Grey Falcon. By Anado Yahone, editor. As uncovered and translated by Anado Yahone, royal archaeologist, from an ancient tome. This tale comes from sometime in the Second Era, most probably after the time of the Nahayden flu, or at least I have so surmised due to reasons in the text. Whether or not the tale is true, it remains an interesting story of survival. The reader will, I trust, forgive me if I translated the epic somewhat informally. The message, I think, is universal, and should not be misread. Enjoy, gentle reader. AJJ. The Grey Falcon, a small warship of the Somerset Isle, was patrolling deep in the ocean for a pirate that had been looting the coast. The first 3 weeks out were uneventful. 2 hours after sunset, on the 22nd day out of port, the lookout spotted a top of a sail in the moonlight, just on the horizon. Sail. To starboard, forward quarter, dot. The lookout of the Grey Falcon cried. The crew and captain of the Grey Falcon were quickly roused, and stumbled to the deck. "'Tis the ship we're looking for, Captain Dot," said the lookout. "All hands to battle stations. All archers to their posts." Dot. The captain yelled. "Full ahead, Dot." The two ships closed, and a dark figure stepped out onto the forecastle of the pirate ship. The figure made a gesture with his hands, and a giant ball of fire streaked towards the Grey Falcon. The ball of fire struck the Grey Falcon in her sails, quickly catching them aflame. The figure made another gesture. Large bolts of ice streaked out from his hands, and hit the Grey Falcon just above and below the water line, gouging large holes in her hull. The Grey Falcon was mortally wounded. The captain cried. "All hands abandon she." Dot. As he was cut off by a pirate's arrow shot into his throat. As the Grey Falcon, aflame and listing badly, plunged into the sea, one of her sailors, Darek Seaspit, managed to avoid the pirate arrows and spells to make his way to a lifeboat, and lowered it into the darkness below. Just as the lifeboat entered the water, a quick grey shape jumped into it. Darek looked, and saw it was Helner Snarlsbane, a Casiat mercenary assigned to the ship. The two rowed the small boat away, as the Grey Falcon finished her descent into the sea. In the darkness, the pirate ship missed their small craft. After the two rowed well out of the pirate's possible view, they both collapsed from exhaustion. Early morning the next day, they took an inventory of the lifeboat's stores. Normally the lifeboat carries enough food and water to supply 7 people for at least 10 days. In place of the food, though, Helner found a note. The food in this lifeboat was found to be in violation of Somerset Navy regulation during inspection. In accordance to that article, the food was taken away and destroyed. A replacement may be obtained by redeeming this letter at the port supply office. Signed, Lieutenant Inspector Windhollow. Helner, read aloud. Said Darek, to his Casiat companion. "We have plenty of water, but we are out of food. I don't know what we're going to do. I suppose we could try fishing, but we have no bait. There's no chance we can make it back to land before we starve to death. 'Twill be over a month in this craft. Wait, I haven't Idea, said Helner, with a gleam in his cat-like eye. 6 weeks later, the lifeboat entered the port of Corwich. As it was tethered to the dock, a solitary figure was pulled out, looking weather-beaten and thin. One of the dock workers peered into the life raft, after the figure was taken away to the port healer for treatment. What's this? A worker said to himself, as he picked up a large bone from the boat, a bone bleached white by the Sunday. After the sole survivor of the Grey Falcon recovered from his ordeal, he was taken to the inquest for the death of Darek Seaspit, and placed on a chair before the magistrate. We here in High Rock have a dim view of cannibalism. You'd better have a good reason for your actions. The Inquisitor boomed at Helner Snarlsbane. By the lady, do you? Helner stood, and said, Your Honor, I had no choice. There was no food, and it was at least 2 months to the closest port. We both decided this was the only way someone would make it. Well, then, I suppose that is understandable, if somewhat distasteful. The Inquisitor said. You think it was distasteful? Helner muttered to himself. I didn't have any seasoning. One final thing, Mr. Snarlsbane, how was it decided that you would be the one that would dine on the other? The toss of a coin. Helner drew himself up and said, Your Honor, it was very simple. Darek Seaspit was a vegetarian. Case dismissed. Special Flora of Tamriel. By Hardin the Herbalist. The poppy, in both black and white varieties, may be found growing wild in the mountains of Hammerfell. Their succulent pods are often the only nourishment for adventurers who find themselves in the wilderness without rations. It is said that black and white poppies imbibed together have magical properties. When they are crushed and mixed with the milk of the agile-footed mountain goat, the resulting potion allows the user to glide safely above ground. Fire fern, a perennial herb, is native to the province of Morrowind. The flowers are inconspicuous and often hidden. The glossy, evergreen foliage and blossoms are resistant to conditions of high heat and bright light. A petal from this plant placed under the adventurer's tongue will provide protection from the heat and fire of the lava pits and thermal streams around Dagathur. Dragon's tongue, a common name for a fern-like herb found in Black Marsh, is especially prolific around the area of the Ulthuris swamp. It is a beautiful wild flower whose name comes from the fire-red fronds that protect its golden efflorescence. As pretty as it is, however, it is a deadly poison to most living beings and needs to be avoided by adventurers, especially unprotected ones, as it is lethal to the touch. It is said, however, that Argonians can handle the plant and use the sap derived from its roots to enhance their endurance. Domica redwort is an herb grown by many residents of Valenwood for their beautiful and showy flowers. They attain a height of about 3 feet and sport feathery leaves. The flowers are usually bright red. In addition to their beauty, they are said to have the magical ability of enhancing the appearance of anyone who carries or wears one of the blooms. Ironwood nut is a hard-shelled fruit that comes from the ironwood trees growing deep in the forests of Skyrim. The wood of these trees is hard as the metal after which it is named. The very rare black variety of ironwood is said to produce a nut which is very succulent and believed to greaten the strength of the adventurer who is able to crack its shell and partake of it. The ginkgo leaves which are found along the banks of rivers and lakes in Hammerfell are most inconspicuous, only their peculiar half-moon shape making them noticeable. The edible foliage is very sweet and quite tasty. Legend has it that when mixed properly with the pulp of the aloe plant, the resulting concoction has the ability of increasing one's stamina for a short while. The Somnalius Fern can be found in the swamps of Black Marsh. The fronds of this plant are light green and quite delicate. Picking a frond can be very difficult, as they usually crumble to the touch, but once retrieved it can be used to put an enemy to sleep for a short while by passing it under his nose. Arrowroot is a thick, rubbery tuber that can be found in the province of Valenwood. The plant is quite difficult to find as its above-ground foliage is very meager and scrawny. But the root itself can be most beneficial to the gatherer as it has magical properties. The paste made from grinding the root is quite wholesome and can improve the user's accuracy with a bow and arrow, or other missile weapon. Nightshade is reputed to be a very poisonous herb. However, the variety found in many parts of elsewhere is cherished by Khajiits who have taken up careers in thievery. Many Khajiits will tuck a piece of nightshade inside their armor to increase their abilities to skulk, hide, and become invisible. The failure of the Empire. It is common knowledge that the fall of the Empire is approaching quickly, and soon its degeneration will result in utter collapse. Ever since the death of Tiber Septim, the Empire's foundations have rotted under weak rulers, and Uriel Septim has only further proven this. The imperial bureaucracy siphons propaganda and lies to the populace, desperately trying to restore faith in this dying creature we obey like fools. In truth, instability and strife mars the entire history of this empire. Lies, murders, treacheries, rage through the imperial city and crush the hopes and dreams of its citizens. How can the mighty Empire allow the continuation of these horrors? The Dunmer and their slaves, the rise of the impious puppeteer, Jagartharn, the incessant infighting of this malignant, bloated creature we call an empire, the assassinations, betrayals, and unwarranted executions so common to our imperial ranks, all of these corruptions scream the empire's failure. And all of this centers on the imperial system and its ruler, the decrepit Uriel Septim. Septim 7 is as weak as he is ignorant. The people of Tamriel have discovered that he rules comfortable in the luxury of the imperial palace through corruption and fear. Under the emperor's sickly hand, secret spy networks which have either removed or jeopardized more freedoms than we have ever thought possible move like murderous wraiths through the people. These blades, as they call themselves, spy on the regular, hard-working common folk simply to satisfy the foul emperor's desire for control of all things. He draws further power from his military police, and all that his self-proclaimed legions do now is murder innocent civilians to ensure themselves a little more time in control. They are nothing but cowards and thugs. The corruption rises through the ranks of this legion, and I have seen from the inside nearly as many imperial guards fall to faulty leadership as to fighting. I've even seen unrest in the city of Cyrodiil itself. Rioting in the streets of the greatest city in Tamriel. And yet the emperor and his legions continue to preach of the glory of the empire. We must ask ourselves what we can do during these times. Will we do nothing? Will we dawdle, like old men, speaking but never taking action? Will we wait for the beasts of anarchy to take hold on this sweet land we love more than all else? We must impel the empire's fall and take control for ourselves. We can rule Tamriel and succeed where the empire and the foolish Uriel Septim cannot.
All right, I'm intrigued. Go ahead. An adventurer, I presume.
Like that, you must be doing very well for yourself. Can I help you? I am known as Gavis Hilveren, coordinator of the Order of Doctrine and Ordination. As a militant scholar, I have devoted my life to the study and interpretation of temple writings and canon. At the moment, my studies are leading me on pilgrimage to the thrice-blessed city of Necrom. I have only briefly stopped at this secluded residence to visit my old friend, Sorval Tamriel.
A small kindness. Byrolis Sovalia. Fallon was a young Dunmer urchin, picking his life's blood from the pockets of those more fortunate than he. Were it not for their unintentional charity, he surely would have starved, or succumbed to disease, or fallen to some other fate years ago. The boy lived by his wits, but the guards never seemed to appreciate his cleverness. His life was a hard one, for no mayor cared for the plight of the orphaned boy. Once upon a time, Fallon had tried his hand at the more honest trade of beggar, but found the hand more likely to fill his belly if it found its way into a merchant's purse. Perhaps if someone had bothered to show Fallon even a small kindness, he would not have become such a troublesome child. As it happened, one typical morning the guards were typically harassing Fallon, typically suspecting the boy of helping himself to another merchant's inventory. As was typical, the boy was guilty through and through, and everyone knew. But through having had such regular dealings with the guards, the young thief had grown accustomed to some degree of familiarity, some sense of bizarre friendship. But on this particular morning, for whatever reason, he was treated with unusual harshness. One guard grabbed him by an ankle, roughly lifted him off the ground, and shook him until his ill-gotten gains spilled onto the ground, after which the child was unceremoniously dropped on his head. Not considering the boy worth any more effort, the guards contented themselves to collect his meager possessions and be on their way. As evening approached, some townsfolk thought it odd that the boy hadn't been seen since the morning's antics. Then, when he finally did return to town, he brought company. He sprinted faster than he'd ever fled the guards, a huge grin on his face hiding just below his terror. Fallon did not ease his murderous pace until he was well within the city limits, and then he simply waited, staring back from where he'd come. The wait was not a long one. 3 cliff racers madly screeched as they flew about looking for mare to tear at. Of course, the guards rushed to meet the terrible beasts, but it was not long before they realized something was not right. None of them were able to land a blow. Still smiling, Fallon ducked into a tavern, and waited again. Everyone knew what had happened, but none could ever prove it. Fallon found more understanding from his fellow mare afterwards. Perhaps if they'd been kinder earlier, his lesson wouldn't have been one they had to learn. The supposition of freedom, a response to the purity of freedom. In his work, The Purity of Freedom, Immanuel Kant argued for the independence of freedom from the influence of action in the physical world. In this work, I respond by citing contradictory points of evidence. Introduction, The Gift of Freedom. What does freedom entail for us? This question is of penultimate importance, but I can only address it shortly for fear of revealing my own ignorance on the subject. Freedom, I believe, exists in its expression as rationality. It allows us to evaluate our own actions and stands as its own final judge, and it separates us from the lesser beasts and slaves, by which I mean the absolute, bound servants of the Didra, who seem to have no control over their lives. The presupposition of freedom and its effects on our actions. Are sentient creatures truly free? Consider this, when I will, and by will I do not mean to imply some great power on my own part. The words will and want are almost interchangeable here, but I emphasize the notion of free will in my selection, some event to occur and it seems that I possess the necessary capabilities to spur that event's transpiration. The actual fruition of that event is not guaranteed. That is, sentient creatures are not absolutely capable of free action. Why does this case exist? From my investigations, it would seem that it is the result of 2 complementary factors, the existence of prophecy and the nature of the Dra as the world's creators. Based on my conclusions here, I will examine the issue of free will as well. As has been witnessed for countless generations, the power of prophecy and destiny cannot be denied. Their effects have reshaped the political, through the existence and current state of the empire, and physical, i.e. the Western warp, landscapes of our continent, and they have indelibly altered our perceptions of the world. In analyzing the concept of freedom, prophecy must be examined because we must question the degree to which it affects a sentient creature. That is, does prophecy alter not only our actions but even our mental states as well? We shall examine this question through the construction of artificial worlds, in which the alternatives are the case. In the first world, we shall assume that prophecy binds only our actions and not our thoughts. In this world, those under the influence of prophecy would be forced to act in spite of their will. This idea strikes me as exceedingly odd. Historically, those under the power of prophecy have acted with an unparalleled surety, which seems counterintuitive considering the awkwardness with which we, and by this I mean ordinary individuals, approach actions that disagree with our thoughts. Consider the example of unwilling executioner raising his blade, or the example of an obstinate child grudgingly obeying his mother. In both cases, the person's actions disagree with their thoughts. Certainly this is not to say that those under prophecy's hold do not have doubts, but a difference exists between doubt and the contradiction of thoughts and actions. This evidence seems to quiet the thought that prophecy guides only our actions. If this is the case, however, we have thus lost a degree of freedom. Prophecy must guide both our thoughts and our actions. Therefore, because prophecy binds us both physically and rationally, we retain essentially no freedom when acting under its influence. This idea threatens the very foundations of our freedom. It has been argued that every event, no matter how great or how small, can be prophesized, or that a prophecy already exists for it. The prophets simply don't waste their time finding every inane aspect of the future. If every action or event has an associated prophecy to guide it, then no action is of our own will. In addressing this issue, it is important to note that a potential solution has been offered to counter this apparently deterministic view. Certainly, it is difficult to argue against the notion that a prophecy exists for each of our actions. However, if we examine the extent to which destiny actually determines our individual actions, the answer becomes significantly more clouded. While the eventual consequence or result may be determined, the means by which we reach that result could remain unwritten. This idea can be presented with the analogy of being in a closed room, representing fate. We are trapped within this room, but we are allowed a degree of freedom in that room. The analogy works only on such a simple scale, however, because each individual free action may be governed by a smaller determination. This idea extends from the decision to kill another person to the decision we make in regulating the rate of our breathing. It would seem that essentially every aspect of our lives could be determined. The second problem with the notion of freedom resides in the constitution of the Dre, our creators. Collectively, the Dre represent stasis, the inability to change. I will not address the peculiarities and apparent paradoxes of the Dre in this volume, i.e. the fact that the Dre can be killed, which would represent a shift in existence, while they embody stasis, but I will address one aspect of the nature of the Dre because of its relevance to the topic at hand. The Dre created our world, once more, a paradox given their nature, but the Dre represent immutability. Freedom represents the ability to change, the ability to shift in thought and action from a destined course. How could the unchanging Dre create a world in which its denizens possess something that they themselves do not? Perhaps the Dre created a world in which something of a lesser version of their nature might exist and amuse them, some shady image of themselves. Given this information, the question becomes more complex and interesting. Are even the Dre free? And if so, does that necessarily mean that we ourselves are free as well? The first question we can never properly answer, for lack of proper evidence. They created the worlds and the laws which may suggest or refute the possibility of mortal freedom, depending upon whether they are free or not. However, did they create these laws spontaneously, or did they base them off of higher laws by which they are themselves governed? Could they have created any other world than the one they did? These questions only dance around the originally proposed question but still touch on its edges. We can never determine whether the Dre are controlled by unseen forces or if they act with true autonomy. The second part of the question, once more, cannot be properly addressed as of yet. Even presuming that the Dre are free, what will they might have had in our creation, i.e. whether to make us free or not, cannot be determined. Did they want something true to their image, or are we simply some sort of experiment of existence? Unfortunately, it seems that I can merely raise questions and not properly answer them. However, this work has hopefully inspired questions worth consideration within the reader's mind. These are the sorts of questions which drive us as sentient creatures, and answering them must be an imperative for our kind.
May you find all that you seek, traveler.